A prisoner vanished from his locked cell without leaving a single trace. For decades, his escape baffled authorities, becoming a haunting legend whispered through the town's foggy streets. But 27 years later, a shocking discovery on the former police commissioner's roof reignites questions long buried in silence. As dark secrets surface, Lancaster must finally confront its hidden past. What really happened to the prisoner on that stormy night, and what truths lie waiting to be uncovered? Lancaster was always a city cloaked in mist and quiet melancholy, nestled gently among rolling hills that wore fog like a familiar, well-loved garment. Streets paved in cobblestones wound their way lazily through clusters of stone buildings, their rooftops slick with constant drizzle, shining softly beneath the pale glow of lanterns that hung faithfully along narrow sidewalks. This city breathed, slowly, deeply, as if savoring every drop of rain, every whispering breeze that caressed its ancient walls. On the northern edge, looming over the rest of Lancaster like an ominous guardian, stood the old prison, fortress of darkened stone and iron bars, weathered by centuries and secrets. Its silhouette cut sharply into the darkening sky, imposing and unyielding, as though built from shadows themselves. Inside, the air was perpetually heavy, thick with echoes and regret. The long corridors stretched endlessly, dimly lit and cold, their walls whispering stories best left untold. Within one of these cells sat Nicholas Hart, whose name alone was enough to hush any conversation into fearful silence. Nicholas was neither tall nor especially strong, yet there was something undeniably powerful in the intensity of his gaze, a darkness in his eyes deeper than the night itself. His tangled black hair hung loosely about his pale face, framing features that were sharp yet somehow strikingly vulnerable. His reputation had spread quickly across Lancaster, blending truth and rumor until no one could say for certain what horrors he had truly committed. But what everyone knew without question was that Nicholas Hart represented danger. His crimes were shrouded in ambiguity. He neither confirmed nor denied them, speaking rarely, and when he did, it was always cryptic, almost poetic. Guards whispered nervously, speculating in hushed tones if he was truly a monster or merely a man pushed to darkness by circumstances unknown. Nicholas, indifferent to their whispers, would sit quietly, staring blankly at the stone floor, as if searching there for answers he himself had long forgotten. That particular night in October of 1987, Lancaster lay trembling beneath a violent storm. Rain battered windows mercilessly, wind screamed through alleys like a wounded beast, and lightning sliced the darkness with brilliant, terrifying intensity. The old prison seemed almost alive, groaning and creaking under nature's fury, its iron gates rattling, a restless giant trapped within its ancient foundations. As the storm reached its peak, the lights within the prison flickered and dimmed, casting erratic shadows along the walls. Guards moved quickly, voices raised above the roaring tempest, securing doors and counting heads, attempting to keep order amidst the chaos outside. But in the turmoil, no one noticed that one cell lay oddly silent, empty of its occupant, the iron bars inexplicably unlocked. When the storm finally broke with the first pale rays of dawn, a silence fell over Lancaster, a stunned, uneasy quiet. As news began spreading, disbelief quickly turned into dread. Nicholas Hart had vanished without a trace, leaving behind an empty cell and questions heavy enough to crush the spirit of the town. The city awoke slowly to the shock of this impossible escape. Shops opened hesitantly. Neighbors gathered on street corners, voices low and worried. Mothers held their children closer, eyes darting nervously toward the prison walls, now seeming less like protection and more like betrayal. The fog clung stubbornly to buildings and streets, unwilling to lift and expose what secrets the night had concealed. Police officers mobilized immediately, their faces etched with concern. Search parties began combing every corner of Lancaster, probing into shadows, overturning each stone. Despite their seriousness, a subtle humor emerged among the younger officers. who, seated later in the warmth of the tavern, debated wildly improbable theories. Maybe he grew wings, one joked half-heartedly, flew straight through the bars. Laughter followed reluctantly, easing briefly the oppressive tension. But the humor quickly dissolved into worried silence once again, as the reality of Hart's escape settled heavier upon them. At the heart of Lancaster's mounting anxiety stood Commissioner Henry Alden, a man of stern reputation and unwavering resolve. Alden was well respected, yet privately haunted by his own doubts and regrets. He paced restlessly in his modest office, overlooking streets blurred by persistent rain. His desk, ordinarily meticulously tidy, was now scattered with urgent memos and hastily scribbled notes. Alden's face was pale, lined with strain, each wrinkle deepening with every passing minute that offered no answer, no comfort. He remembered vividly the day Nicholas Hart had first been brought before him, a frail-looking young man whose quiet voice and careful words had unsettled Alden deeply. Even then, something about Hart's calm demeanor had felt disturbingly out of place, as if he knew something the rest of them did not. Alden had never fully shaken that feeling, and now, standing amidst the chaos left by Hart's disappearance, it clawed at him with renewed vigor. Just as Alden sank wearily into his chair, staring blankly into the rain-blurred cityscape, the office door swung open suddenly, revealing Sergeant Oliver. The young officer's eyes were wide, his breathing hurried. The commissioner straightened immediately, his stomach nodding instinctively. "Commissioner Alden," Oliver's voice trembled slightly, betraying urgency, disbelief, and a fear that chilled Alden's bones. "Sir, Nicholas Hart, he's gone. Completely. No forced locks, no broken bars, no footprints. It's as if he simply vanished." The room fell into a deafening silence, broken only by the distant patter of rain against the window panes. Alden felt a chill spread through him slowly, settling deep within his chest. The impossible had occurred, and Lancaster, he realized grimly, might never be the same again. Lancaster, now trapped in the shadow of unanswered questions, became a city restless beneath the weight of uncertainty. The days following Nicholas Hart's disappearance were filled with frantic searches, anxious whispers, and countless unanswered calls to the police department. Every alley, every basement, every lonely stretch of woodland was carefully examined, yet each clue led investigators further into confusion rather than clarity. Commissioner Henry Alden stood at the heart of this storm, a man whose authority was unquestionable, yet whose eyes revealed depths of quiet doubt that seemed to deepen daily. Alden was meticulous by nature, carefully combing through details, sorting through evidence with a patience bordering on obsession. His office became his sanctuary, and his prison a room filled with smoke, stacks of paperwork, half-empty cups of coffee, and the muted hum of frustration. Weeks passed, and the frantic energy gave way slowly to despair. Leads became scarcer, and witnesses grew tired of repeating accounts that offered no new insights. The townspeople, initially fueled by intrigue, gradually returned to their quiet routines, each silently convinced the escaped prisoner was far away by now. A threat that had faded like a forgotten nightmare. In the heart of this investigative exhaustion, one figure emerged repeatedly: Arthur Collins, the elderly caretaker of Lancaster Prison. Arthur was a curious character, eccentric and unpredictable, with a wiry frame and wild, gray hair that seemed to defy gravity. His eyes twinkled mischievously behind round spectacles, and his voice carried a hint of laughter no matter how serious the conversation. Each interrogation with Arthur followed a familiar pattern. He would sit comfortably, legs crossed, sipping his tea as though chatting with old friends rather than investigators. When asked direct questions, Arthur's responses danced around facts, filled with anecdotes that began promisingly, yet ended far from clarity. "I remember the day Nicholas arrived," Arthur recounted with a nostalgic smile. "Quiet fellow. Didn't speak much, but when he did, well, let's just say he had a way with words, poetry almost. Not that it made sense, mind you, but beautiful nonsense nonetheless. Investigators would press him gently. Did he say anything unusual, Arthur? Anything suspicious? Arthur chuckled softly, shaking his head. Everything Nicholas said was unusual, but suspicious? Oh, I'm afraid my memory's grown holes like my socks. Perhaps he mentioned freedom, once or twice, but don't we all? Each session ended similarly, with investigators sighing in frustration, and Arthur politely offering them biscuits on their way out, as though the conversation had been nothing more than a pleasant visit. Despite his evasions, there was a warmth to Arthur that disarmed even the most skeptical detective, leaving them uncertain if he was a master of deception or simply a harmless old man caught up in events beyond his comprehension. Meanwhile, Commissioner Alden grew increasingly withdrawn. His presence around the station became ghost-like, eyes shadowed with exhaustion, his posture carrying a heaviness born from failure. Henry Alden was a proud man, shaped by a lifetime of integrity, but Nicholas Hart's escape became a stain upon his career, a silent accusation from the empty cell that haunted his every moment alone. As Alden pored over reports late into the night, memories surged forth without invitation. He recalled the first interrogation with Nicholas, vividly seeing again that thin, pale face, calm yet unsettlingly detached. Hart had watched him quietly, eyes unblinking, his voice whispering softly as he spoke of innocence and guilt in riddles Alden never fully understood. "Have you ever wondered, Commissioner," Nicholas had murmured softly, almost sadly, "if justice and truth are actually the same thing?" Alden had brushed off the remark then, dismissing it as the rambling of a desperate man. Yet now those words echoed persistently, gnawing at his peace, filling quiet moments with doubts that felt strangely personal. He wrestled silently, wondering if his certainty about Hart's guilt had clouded his judgment, made him overlook something vital. Months turned slowly into years, and the investigation inevitably lost its momentum. Files were gradually buried beneath newer, more pressing concerns, gathering dust alongside forgotten coffee cups and faded memos. Nicholas Hart faded from daily conversations, lingering only in whispered legends shared among curious youngsters daring each other to sneak near the prison walls after dark. With Alden's retirement years later, Lancaster seemed to finally exhale, releasing the weight of unresolved mystery into the quiet, rainy air. Life drifted onward, and eventually, Nicholas Hart became little more than a shadowy memory, a name uttered only in cautionary tales or half-hearted jokes at local gatherings. Yet Lancaster, ever patient in guarding its secrets, was not finished with Henry Alden. Exactly 27 years to the day after Nicholas Hart vanished into the stormy night, Alden, now a quiet figure living alone in his modest home on the outskirts of town, awoke to the sound of voices and hurried footsteps. Groggy and confused, he stepped outside, squinting into the early morning mist. Several workers stood atop his roof, their faces pale and drawn, eyes wide with disbelief. "What is it?" Alden called out, his voice tinged with a sudden dread that squeezed tightly at his chest. One worker leaned forward, his words trembling slightly in the cool morning air. "Commissioner Alden, we found something. You'd better come up." Climbing slowly, Alden's heart pounded painfully. Each rung of the ladder felt like an accusation, a step backward through years he had tried desperately to forget. When he reached the rooftop, he stared down at the opening, frozen in horror and disbelief. Lying exposed amidst broken timbers and rotted insulation, a skeleton in the unmistakable orange prison uniform rested silently, like a ghost awakened from slumber. Alden's breath caught sharply, the sight overwhelming him with memories and unanswered questions he'd long buried beneath layers of forced indifference. He reached for the nearest support, feeling the dizzying wave of history washing over him, pulling him back to that stormy night nearly 3 decades before. The workers stood silently, waiting, eyes darting nervously from the skeletal remains. back to Alden, their faces echoing the confusion and dread that now enveloped him. Alden knew instantly the questions this would resurrect, questions he feared might reveal truths too terrible to face. And there, atop his own roof under a sky of persistent gray clouds, Henry Alden realized that Lancaster's secrets, like Nicholas, Hart himself, had never truly vanished. They had merely been waiting quietly in the shadows, patiently biding their time, ready to demand answers from those who had sought so desperately to forget. The discovery atop Henry Alden's roof sent waves of shock cascading once again through Lancaster, reigniting questions that had quietly faded over decades. Whispers multiplied rapidly, spreading through cobblestone streets, curling around cafe tables, drifting into homes like mist seeping beneath locked doors. Among those pulled irresistibly into the storm of renewed intrigue was Clara Mitchell. Clara had always possessed a strong personality, tempered by humor that danced on the razor edge of sarcasm. Sharp-eyed and quick-tongued, she was known around Lancaster's police station for her wit, an armor she wore to mask the quiet frustrations that simmered beneath her confident exterior. Clara carried within her an unfulfilled promise, a legacy left unfinished by her father, Detective William Mitchell, whose greatest regret had been failing to solve Nicholas Hart's disappearance. Now, standing in the shadow of Alden's house, Clara felt as if she had stepped into the tangled threads of her father's unresolved past. She watched with a quiet intensity as the forensic team examined the skeletal remains. Beside her stood Edmund Brooks, a retired detective whose bitterness was legendary among Lancaster's officers, his demeanor as gruff and worn as the long coat he habitually wore. Edmund had spent years quietly cursing the Hart case from the solitude of retirement, convinced that Alden's failure had cast an indelible stain over all who'd been involved. Together, they formed an odd partnership. Clara, young and fiercely driven. Edmund, weathered by disillusionment, his cynical outlook now tempered by a flickering spark of hope at a second chance for redemption. Edmund surveyed the remains grimly, shaking his head. "You ever think this town just enjoys tormenting itself? Clara, can't seem to bury a secret deep enough around here." Clara smiled slightly, eyes still fixed on the bones. "Keeps life interesting, Ed. Otherwise, you'd have nothing left to complain about." Edmund snorted softly, pulling his coat tighter around himself. "You're just like your father, same wit, same stubborn streak. But he never figured this one out, did he?" Clara's smile faded slightly, her voice softer but firm. "Maybe that's why we're here to finish what he started." The following days were a blur of meticulous investigation. Clara and Edmund pored over every scrap of evidence collected from Alden's rooftop, their methodical examination slowly revealing troubling contradictions. Small details, like a missing button or an unusual tear in the fabric, raised unsettling questions. Clara spent countless late nights at her desk, sifting through records, old photographs, and interviews from nearly 3 decades earlier. Edmund provided quiet companionship, his grumbling complaints masking genuine admiration for her determination. Their conversations frequently spilled over into the local cafe, a warm, bustling spot known simply as Annie's. Annie, a cheerful woman with round spectacles and a permanent smile, welcomed the investigators warmly, always offering a gentle ribbing alongside freshly brewed coffee. One particularly gloomy afternoon, surrounded by curious townsfolk discreetly eavesdropping from nearby tables, Edmund stared moodily into his coffee. "I've got it." Nicholas Hart staged the escape, climbed Alden's roof, and accidentally walled himself in. Case solved. "You're welcome." Clara raised an eyebrow skeptically. So, Hart meticulously planned an impossible escape only to trap himself willingly on Alden's roof? Edmund shrugged theatrically. Criminal masterminds can be surprisingly stupid. Sometimes, believe me, I've met plenty. Laughter rippled through the cafe, easing the tension momentarily. Annie leaned over their table, winking conspiratorially. "You know, Ed, If detective work doesn't pan out this time around, you've got a bright future writing mystery novels." Edmund waved her off with exaggerated disdain, hiding a rare smile behind his mug, yet beneath their playful banter, both Clara and Edmund knew the truth. Every clue uncovered brought more confusion than clarity. Interviews with former guards, old inmates, and neighbors yielded nothing substantial. Arthur Collins, now ancient but still lively, provided no fresh answers. Sitting comfortably on his porch, Arthur greeted them warmly, recounting once again how Hart had often spoken of freedom and riddles. "Arthur," Clara pressed gently, "did Hart ever mention Commissioner Alden directly? Did they have a relationship?" Arthur paused thoughtfully, eyes twinkling behind thick lenses. "Relationship? Not exactly. But Nicholas had a peculiar way of observing people, and Alden fascinated him. Said the commissioner had secrets deeper than the prison's foundations." "Of course," Arthur chuckled. "He said similar things about the cook's terrible stew. Man saw intrigue in everything." Clara sighed, amused despite herself, as Edmund grumbled beside her. They left Arthur's porch, exchanging weary glances, knowing their search had reached another dead end. Days turned to weeks, and despite the initial excitement, the investigation gradually began losing steam again. The bones from Alden's roof had been taken to a forensic lab for thorough analysis, leaving the town suspended in anticipation. Clara refused to accept defeat, her nights sleepless with lingering frustration. Edmund, too, felt a familiar heaviness returning, doubting their ability to resolve the past's persistent mysteries. Then, one chilly morning, Clara received a call from the forensic lab that changed everything. Arriving hastily, Edmund trailing close behind, Clara stepped into the sterile environment where Dr. Jonathan Harris, the forensic pathologist, awaited them, his expression unreadable. Edmund muttered quietly, clearly unsettled by the clinical surroundings. Clara nudged him gently, eliciting an exaggerated sigh. Dr. Harris cleared his throat, visibly hesitant. "Detective Mitchell, Mr. Brooks, we've concluded our analysis." Clara braced herself, sensing something profoundly unsettling in his demeanor. Edmund straightened, wary yet expectant. The skeletal remains found at Commissioner Alden's residence are indeed authentic prison-issue uniform and all dash, but ... Dr. Harris hesitated, meeting Clara's gaze directly. "They don't belong to Nicholas Hart." A heavy silence descended. Clara felt her pulse quicken sharply, confusion surging through her veins. Beside her, Edmund swore softly, eyes narrowed in disbelief. "Not Hart. Then who?" Dr. Harris shook his head solemnly. "We don't know yet, but dental records and previous injuries confirm without a doubt it isn't Hart." Clara stood motionless, her thoughts racing. Edmund, beside her, rubbed his temple in frustration, his voice a low growl. "So, after nearly 3 decades, the body we found only adds more questions than answers." Clara inhaled deeply, her mind rapidly recalibrating their next steps. She turned toward Edmund, a fierce determination lighting her eyes, pushing away the creeping despair that threatened to overwhelm them both. "Then that's where we started. If this isn't Hart, we find out exactly who it is. Someone went to a great deal of trouble to put this body up there, and I'm betting it wasn't to hide an accident." Edmund regarded her carefully, recognizing the fiery resolve in Clara's expression, a mirror of her father's own unwavering spirit. He nodded slowly, the spark of hope reigniting within him. "Well, Mitchell," Edmund murmured with grudging admiration, "I suppose retirement can wait a little longer." Outside, the skies above Lancaster darkened once more, clouds thickening, like secrets long kept hidden, promising storms yet to come. Clara knew instinctively that their real search was only just beginning, and that somewhere deep within Lancaster's heart, the truth waited patiently, ready at last to be revealed. Following the unsettling revelation from the forensic lab, Clara Mitchell and Edmund Brooks dove deeper into Lancaster's murky past, a past now growing darker with each new discovery. Every interview, every conversation felt like brushing dust from old bones, hoping desperately that beneath the layers of confusion, some truth might finally emerge. They began by revisiting the former guards, men long retired, living quiet lives on the fringes of town. They spoke softly, hesitantly, as if fearful of disturbing memories they'd carefully buried. Most offered vague recollections, their stories fading into frustratingly identical versions of routine patrols and uneventful shifts. But Clara noted how eyes shifted nervously when certain names were mentioned, particularly Commissioner Alden's. These subtle reactions lingered in her mind, troubling her sleep. The next stop was the modest home of a former inmate named Lucas Greer. Lucas, now a thin and nervous man in his late 50s, lived in a cluttered little apartment filled with stacks of old newspapers yellowing at the edges. He answered the door cautiously, peering suspiciously through thick glasses, his wary demeanor relaxing only slightly when Clara flashed her badge. "What do you want from me now?" Lucas muttered, glancing anxiously around as if unseen eyes watched. "From the shadows." "Just a conversation," Clara assured him gently, stepping inside. Edmund followed, eyeing the clutter skeptically. "Nice decorating style," Edmund observed dryly. Inspired by organized chaos. Lucas shot him an irritated glance. "It's my filing system. If I clean up, I lose everything." Clara hid a smile, easing the tension. They settled in worn armchairs, and Lucas gradually relaxed, though he remained guarded. When she asked about his memories of Nicholas Hart, Lucas visibly stiffened. Hart was quiet, Lucas finally admitted, but everyone knew something wasn't right about his case. Guards talked, whispers in the dark about people high up pulling strings, making evidence disappear. Clara leaned forward, intrigued. Did anyone ever mention specific names? Lucas hesitated, lowering his voice. All roads led back to Alden. He had connections, powerful friends, people who made problems vanish permanently. Edmund raised an eyebrow, skeptically. "You're saying Alden framed Hart?" Lucas shook his head. "No, I'm saying Alden was afraid. Hart knew something he shouldn't have, something big enough to get him silenced." As Clara and Edmund left Lucas's apartment, a cold unease settled between them, the conspiracy now far deeper than they'd imagined. Clara knew their next conversation with Alden would be difficult and potentially dangerous. When they arrived at Alden's home, he greeted them stiffly, the confident authority that had once defined him now replaced by brittle defensiveness. His voice trembled slightly as he insisted again he had no idea how the body had ended up on his roof. Edmund pressed harder, skepticism evident. "Funny," Edmund remarked casually, "how trouble always seems to find its way to your doorstep, Henry." Alden bristled. "Careful, Brooks. Accusations without evidence can be costly." Clara intervened quickly, redirecting the conversation smoothly. "Commissioner, were there any unusual threats or warnings back when Hart vanished? Anyone pressuring you?" Alden hesitated briefly, eyes flickering with uncertainty before he shook his head firmly. "No, none that I recall." Edmund scoffed openly, earning a sharp glance from Clara. They left Alden's house in tense silence, each aware they were venturing into dangerous waters. That evening, sitting quietly in Edmund's small home office, Clara thumbed through her father's old notebooks, feeling the weight of his frustration and disappointment. As Edmund brewed coffee, a folded letter slipped unexpectedly from between the pages, landing softly at Clara's feet. She unfolded it slowly, her heartbeat quickening as she read the words written decades ago. "They're hiding him, William. Watch Alden and Collins closely. Trust no one." Clara felt a chill crawl down her spine. Edmund, noticing her expression, leaned over. "What's wrong?" She handed him the letter silently. Edmund's face darkened. "Collins. Old Arthur's tangled. In this deeper than we thought." The next day, Clara confronted Arthur Collins once more, determined to unravel his carefully woven facade. Arthur greeted them warmly as usual, offering tea and biscuits. Edmund politely declined. Clara remained firm. "Arthur, I found this," she said evenly, holding up her father's letter. Arthur's cheerful expression wavered momentarily. "Why would someone suspect you?" Arthur sighed, settling into his chair, eyes suddenly serious. "I'm just a humble caretaker, detective. People assume I know more than I do." Edmund leaned forward, pressing harder. "We found a body on Alden's roof. Someone put it there." "Why?" Arthur smiled sadly, shaking his head. "I can't say. Or won't." Clara pushed, eyes locked fiercely. Onto his dot. Arthur hesitated visibly, his facade cracking just slightly. "Detective Mitchell, sometimes the past is safer hidden." Days later, anonymous letters began arriving, warnings scribbled hastily, urging Clara and Edmund to drop their inquiries. Clara's car window was shattered overnight. Edmund received threatening phone calls late at night, unsettling but vague. The tension escalated swiftly, yet both knew retreat was not an option. Despite the growing threats, they persisted, delving further into Arthur's background. Records revealed a troubling past. Arthur had once been involved in smuggling contraband into the prison, a scandal covered quietly decades ago. Clara realized Arthur's gentle demeanor concealed a darker truth. Late one evening, Edmund and Clara received a call from an informant, an anxious ex-guard who claimed he had critical information. Arriving at the meeting point, a shadowy parking lot by the river loon, they found him nervously pacing. "Arthur Collins," the guard whispered urgently, eyes darting fearfully. "He switched the bodies. I saw him the night Hart vanished, moving a prisoner wrapped in blankets into Alden's personal car." Clara felt her pulse race sharply. Who was it? Hart? The guard shook his head frantically. No, it wasn't Hart. It was Richard Langley, another prisoner who'd been threatening to expose Alden's corruption. Langley disappeared just days before Hart. Collins helped Alden hide him, used him as a decoy. Edmund exhaled slowly. So Hart was never on Alden's roof? Collins placed Langley's remains there as a distraction? Exactly, the guard confirmed, terrified. But it all goes deeper. Alden, Collins, they were pawns for someone far more powerful. The next morning, armed with evidence and testimony, Clara led officers to Arthur's home. Arthur watched calmly as they cuffed him, his eyes locked sadly onto Clara's. "I hoped you'd let sleeping dogs lie," Arthur murmured quietly as officers guided him toward the waiting patrol car. "Lancaster isn't ready for the truth." Clara met his gaze steadily, her voice firm. "Lancaster needs the truth, Arthur." "So do I." As Arthur's car disappeared, Edmund stepped closer, voice heavy yet resolute. "We got Collins, but the guard mentioned someone bigger. If Arthur was just a pawn, we're barely scratching the surface." Clara nodded solemnly, knowing their investigation was far from over. Lancaster's quiet facade had begun cracking, revealing secrets deeper and darker than she'd ever imagined. Yet Clara felt stronger than ever, driven by the relentless determination that had defined her father's legacy. Around them, Lancaster stirred uneasily, sensing truths buried long ago were finally clawing their way toward the surface, refusing to remain silent any longer. With Arthur Collins now safely behind bars, a sense of cautious relief settled briefly over Lancaster. Though both Clara Mitchell and Edmund Brooks knew the darkest corners of the mystery still lay unexplored, their instincts urged them deeper. Into the past, deeper into the cold, silent heart of the prison itself, a fortress of stone that hid secrets older than the pair of detectives hunting for them. Returning to Collins's home, Clara meticulously sifted through stacks of yellowed papers and frayed journals, hoping the elderly caretaker had left behind some trail of crumbs to follow. Edmund grumbled quietly, battling the stubborn buttons on a recording device, his large fingers fumbling with the small, delicate controls. "You know, Mitchell," Edmund growled, irritation thick in his voice. "In my day, we wrote notes on good old-fashioned paper. None of this fancy nonsense that refuses to work. Clara smiled, shaking her head gently as she took the device from his hands, easily switching it on. Technology, Edmund, it's not your enemy. Well, usually. Edmund sighed dramatically, eyes narrowing suspiciously at the blinking device. It conspires against me. Mark my words. Their playful exchange faded quickly into seriousness as Clara unfolded a brittle, faded document tucked discreetly between pages of an old ledger. Her heart quickened, recognizing Collins's handwriting immediately. Hurried and uneven. NH secured beneath foundations. Entrance hidden, northeast wing. God forgive us. Edmund read the note over her shoulder, his expression grimly determined. So, Hart never left the prison at all. Buried beneath the foundations, what in God's name happened in that place? Clara's throat tightened slightly. Whatever it was, Edmund, my father spent his life trying to find out. Now it's our turn. The following day, armed with determination and a set of heavy, rusted keys discovered among Collins's belongings, Clara and Edmund returned to the shadowed corridors of the old prison. It lay silent and abandoned, corridors stretching emptily. Ahead, the air heavy with dust and decades of neglect. The northeast wing loomed particularly forbidding, its halls sealed long ago, wrapped in caution tape now faded and brittle with age. Edmund's footsteps echoed softly as they moved deeper into the prison's forgotten heart, the feeble beam of his flashlight piercing the oppressive gloom. Clara followed closely, her pulse steady but quick, every shadow seeming to whisper secrets just beyond her hearing. Doors hung open at unsettling angles, cell walls etched deeply with the desperation of prisoners long forgotten. Clara's flashlight traced these markings, each scratch and scrawl speaking of lives spent in hopeless solitude. Memories of her father surged gently, recalling late evenings when he'd returned home exhausted and silent, eyes haunted by the cases he couldn't solve. She remembered vividly how he'd often sat at their small kitchen table, notes spread in chaotic piles, frustration weighing heavily on his broad shoulders. Sometimes it feels like these walls talk. Clara, he'd said once, eyes weary but resolute. We just have to listen carefully enough. She understood his words now more clearly than ever, feeling the oppressive silence pressing in around her, as if the very walls held breath, waiting patiently for someone brave enough to listen. Deeper. Into the wing, the air grew colder, thicker. Edmund paused occasionally, glaring suspiciously at his malfunctioning flashlight, muttering about conspiracies and sabotage. Clara, suppressing a smile despite the grim setting, gently tapped it back to life each time. Eventually, they reached a heavy door, rusted shut, refusing to budge beneath Edmund's insistent tugging. Clara handed him a crowbar from their gear, watching patiently as he leveraged his full weight against it, finally forcing it open with an echoing screech of protest. Inside, a staircase spiraled downward into darkness, each step covered with layers of dust untouched for decades. Clara's heart pounded, sensing they were close to uncovering something pivotal, something Lancaster had hidden away beneath stone and silence. Edmund moved ahead cautiously, grumbling under his breath about never-ending stairs and questionable life choices. At the bottom, they found themselves in a long-abandoned sublevel, cold, cramped corridors lined with sealed-off rooms, each door bearing a heavy padlock. Clara hesitated momentarily, a sudden, inexplicable dread gripping her chest. Edmund noticed, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. "You all right, Mitchell?" She nodded quickly, determination replacing her brief unease. "Yes, just ghosts. Plenty of those around here," Edmund murmured grimly, stepping forward once more. As they explored further, Clara's flashlight caught the faint outline of a door hidden partially by piles of discarded furniture and debris. Clearing the obstruction with effort, they found another rusted lock, this one quickly yielding beneath their urgency. Inside lay a small, windowless room, barren save for a wooden table stacked neatly with files of official records bearing Alden's signature. Clara scanned quickly, her breath catching sharply as the truth revealed itself, document after document. Each file detailed prisoner movements, covert orders, and secret instructions, all pointing unmistakably toward Alden's involvement. A carefully orchestrated cover-up that reached far beyond Nicholas' heart. Edmund swore softly, shaking his head. In disbelief, Alden's tangled up deeper than we thought. How far does this go, Clara? She turned slowly, eyes troubled. Too far. It was never just Hart. It was anyone who threatened to expose the truth. Alden buried them here. A silence settled between them, heavy with the weight of their discovery. Then, as Clara moved to gather the files, her flashlight swept accidentally over the wall behind them, revealing a faint, barely perceptible outline. "Edmund, look," she whispered urgently, approaching cautiously. Together, they examined the wall, fingertips tracing the faint seam, a hidden door, masterfully concealed. Another hidden entrance? Edmund groaned softly, though his eyes held cautious excitement. Collins wrote, "Beneath the foundations." Clara murmured thoughtfully, fingers trembling slightly as they searched for a mechanism. This might lead directly there. She found a small lever cleverly embedded within the wall's rough surface. Exchanging a tense glance with Edmund, Clara slowly pulled it downward. The wall shuddered briefly, a hidden panel sliding back quietly to reveal a narrow, winding passage descending even deeper into darkness. Both stood frozen for a moment, staring silently into the unknown, the air thickening around them. Still time to turn back, Edmund joked weakly, though his voice held no real conviction. Clara inhaled deeply, steadying herself, feeling the gentle, reassuring presence of her father's memory guiding her forward. "We've come too far, Edmund. Answers are down there, waiting." Stepping resolutely into the hidden passage, Clara felt the chill seep deeper into her bones, uncertainty and anticipation tightening in her chest. Edmund followed close behind, their footsteps echoing softly as the hidden door closed quietly behind them, sealing away the faint glow from above. Ahead, only darkness awaited, cold, patient, and filled with secrets Lancaster had fought desperately to bury, but which now, inevitably, demanded to be uncovered. Clara and Edmund stepped cautiously into the hidden chamber, their breath forming soft clouds in the cold, stale air. The darkness pressed around them, thick and unyielding, pierced only by the wavering beams of their flashlights. Each step felt heavier, burdened by anticipation, dread, and the relentless gravity of decades-old secrets. The passage opened into a narrow, low-ceilinged chamber, the walls uneven and damp, lined with rough bricks hastily placed long ago. Clara raised her flashlight, its thin beam trembling slightly across the wall ahead, illuminating something half-hidden among the shadows. Her heart paused, a sudden heavy weight within her chest. Edmund moved silently beside her, breathing heavily, eyes wide and grimly expectant. They approached slowly, almost reverently. Embedded behind a crumbling section of wall was a shape that spoke volumes in its silent, horrifying presence, the unmistakable outline of a human figure, its skeletal remains still wrapped loosely in tattered prison clothes. The orange jumpsuit had faded to pale, dirty rust, the fabric rotting gently over the years, threads unraveled, bone exposed like stark truth against the darkness. Clara felt Edmund's hand tighten briefly on her shoulder, a rare gesture of quiet support. Her heart twisted painfully, sorrow mixing sharply with the profound shock of discovery. Nicholas Hart had never escaped into the storm that terrible night. He had never tasted the freedom Lancaster feared he had stolen. Instead, he had met his fate here, sealed within stone and silence, buried alive with secrets too dangerous to be whispered. They stood wordlessly for a long moment, absorbing the gravity of their discovery, the cruelty of the injustice inflicted upon this forgotten soul. Clara's pulse echoed gently, sorrow blending deeply with the quiet triumph of finally uncovering the truth her father had chased in vain. Word of the discovery spread quickly through Lancaster, igniting a firestorm of whispers. and disbelief. The city was stunned, hearts and homes shaken by the revelation of Hart's hidden burial, a truth too disturbing to easily accept. Yet amidst shock, a quiet relief also surfaced, the collective exhale of a community burdened too long by unanswered questions. But Clara knew their journey wasn't finished. Justice still demanded answers and accountability. Henry Alden, whose shadow had darkened every step of their investigation, needed to confront the consequences of his choices. Clara found Alden waiting quietly at his home, his face pale and strained, eyes hollow with resignation. They sat facing each other across his dining table, silence heavy between them, charged with unspoken accusations and deeply buried shame. Clara broke the silence gently, yet firmly. "Why, Commissioner? Why did Nicholas Hart have to die?" Alden's shoulders sank visibly, his voice barely more than a whisper. He knew too much. Secrets, powerful people, dangerous truths. He threatened to expose corruption that ran deeper than you can imagine. "I did what I thought necessary to protect this town." Clara's voice sharpened, anger and grief intertwined. "You didn't protect Lancaster. You poisoned it with lies. You let suspicion and fear fester. You buried truth with a man who deserved justice, not a cold grave in the walls." Alden met her gaze, remorse evident in his tired eyes. "I believed I was protecting everyone, but I lost myself along the way. It became easier to hide mistakes than to face them. Nicholas wasn't a criminal, Clara. He was simply unfortunate enough to see behind our masks." Clara stood slowly, sadness and resolve mingling in her voice. "You have to answer for what you've done. The truth deserves sunlight, not shadows." Days passed, and Lancaster gradually emerged from the storm of revelations, battered yet resilient, hearts weary but hopeful. Nicholas Hart received the dignity in death he'd been denied in life, laid finally to rest beneath a quiet, mournful sky. Attended by townspeople whose understanding had been painfully reshaped by the hard edges of truth, Edmund stood quietly beside Clara at the funeral, his face softened by compassion. Later, standing beside her father's grave beneath an evening sky streaked gently with twilight gold, Clara whispered softly, "We did it, Dad. Your burden is lifted." Edmund cleared his throat gently, his voice gruff yet warm. "Your father would be proud, Clara. You carried his hope better than he ever could have." Clara smiled faintly, eyes glistening with quiet tears. "Thank you, Edmund, for everything." Edmund nodded slowly, pulling his worn coat tighter around himself against the cool breeze. "It's time for an old detective to step aside. Let younger eyes keep watch. But you know where to find me, complaining somewhere about modern technology. Probably." She laughed softly, gratitude filling the gentle silence. "Don't go too far, Ed. Lancaster still needs your grumbling." He walked away slowly, leaving Clara to gaze quietly toward the horizon, a peaceful stillness settling within her chest. The clouds gathering overhead seemed lighter now, less threatening, as if they too had released long-held secrets into the Keke. Open air, finally free dot in the weeks that followed, Lancaster moved quietly forward. Its streets still cloaked gently in mist, but now the mist felt cleansing rather than oppressive. Rain fell softly, washing gently over stone rooftops and cobblestone streets, each droplet carrying away pieces of a burden held too long. Windows glowed warmly once again, neighbors greeting each other openly, cautious smiles exchanged freely, hope cautiously restored. The old prison, now fully revealed in its haunted history, stood silent and empty, a monument to lessons painfully learned, its gates closed for good, nature slowly reclaiming the cracks and crevices, vines weaving gently through bars no longer needed dot, and as the gentle rain continued to fall, Lancaster breathed deeply, the storm of decades finally receding. Clara Mitchell stood beneath soft droplets, feeling each one touch her skin like forgiveness, like peace, like the quiet promise of redemption granted to a city that had finally confronted its own shadow. Lancaster would always carry its scars deep, permanent reminders etched into stone and memory. But scars, Clara understood now, also told stories of healing, resilience, and strength. They reminded everyone of the price of silence, but also of the power of truth. As twilight settled gently upon Lancaster, lanterns flickered softly to life, illuminating streets that had witnessed so much. Beneath the rain, the city seemed to sigh softly, releasing finally the heavy ghosts it had long carried, embracing instead the fragile, hopeful beauty of new beginnings. Clara stepped forward, heart lighter, spirit renewed, carrying within her the quiet certainty that justice, though often slow and painful, had finally found its way home. And somewhere deep within the gentle murmur of falling rain, she imagined she heard her father's voice whispering softly, proudly, "Well done." Lancaster, beneath the soft, purifying rain, moved slowly forward, forever changed, yet finally at peace, its stories told, its wounds acknowledged, its soul gently healing beneath the infinite, patient skies.